They called it the worst-kept secret in Hollywood. For 26 years, Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy loved each other in the shadows of the most visible industry in the world. No wedding, no public acknowledgement, no happily ever after. Just two of the greatest actors who ever lived, bound together by a love that could never be legitimized, and a woman who chose to live in the margins of her own life for a man who could never fully be hers. This is the story of Hollywood's most impossible love affair. When Katharine Hepburn first met Spencer Tracy in 1942 on the set of Woman of the Year, she was 34 years old, already a major star, and famous for being difficult. Tracy was 42, married with 2 children, and one of MGM's biggest box office draws. Legend has it that when producer Joseph L. Mankiewicz introduced them, Hepburn looked at Tracy and said, "I fear I may be too tall for you, Mr. Tracy." Tracy looked back and replied, "Don't worry, Miss Hepburn, I'll cut you down to size." It was the beginning of everything. But here's what most people don't know about that meeting. Tracy was already trapped in a marriage he couldn't escape, and Hepburn was about to make a choice that would define the rest of her life. Because Spencer Tracy was Catholic, devoutly, unshakably Catholic, and in his world, divorce wasn't just frowned upon. It was a mortal sin, a ticket to eternal damnation. His wife Louise knew about the drinking, she knew about the depression, she knew about the other women over the years, but she would never grant him a divorce, and Tracy would never ask for one. Not because he didn't want it, but because his faith held him hostage. And so when he fell in love with Katharine Hepburn, completely and irreversibly, he came with an impossible condition. He could love her, but he could never marry her. Most women would have walked away. Hepburn stayed for 26 years. The affair began quietly, as these things do. They made Woman of the Year together, and the chemistry was so electric that audiences could feel it through the screen. Critics raved. The studio immediately wanted more. So did Hepburn and Tracy. They made 8 more films together over the next 25 years, each one a masterclass in 2 actors so attuned to each other that they seemed to share one mind. But the beginning was anything but smooth. When filming started, Hepburn irritated Tracy. She was too energetic, too opinionated. She would suggest line readings, question blocking, challenge the director. Tracy, famously economical as an actor, found her exhausting. He told friends he couldn't stand her. And then something shifted. Maybe it was watching her work, seeing the intelligence behind the energy. Maybe it was a conversation that went deeper. Maybe proximity, 12 hours a day together, discovering they understood each other in ways nobody else did. Whatever it was, by the time filming wrapped, Spencer Tracy was in love with Katharine Hepburn. The problem was everything else. Tracy's marriage to Louise had started strong. She'd given up her career when they married. Their first son, John, was born deaf, and Louise devoted her life to his education, pioneering new techniques for teaching deaf children. She became an expert, an advocate, a force. Tracy admired her work even as their marriage deteriorated. The guilt he felt over John's deafness haunted him. He believed it was punishment for his sins. He drank to silence that voice. He had affairs to distract from emptiness. But Louise remained constant, raising their children, building her programs, maintaining the appearance of happiness. She was too devoted to her work, too Catholic to consider divorce, and Tracy was too Catholic to ask. So when Hepburn entered his life, she entered an impossible situation. She knew it. Friends warned her, "Walk away, you'll be the mistress forever." Hidden, waiting, living half a life. Hepburn heard them, and chose Tracy anyway. But off-screen, they lived in a strange limbo. Tracy stayed married to Louise. He lived in a house she maintained. He attended family functions. He played the role of husband, at least on paper. Meanwhile, Hepburn became the other woman in her own love story, existing in the spaces Tracy's real life left empty. She bought a house near his. She cooked his meals. She nursed him through his drinking binges and depression. She scheduled her life around his availability. When he was filming, she was there. When he went home to Louise, Hepburn disappeared into her own life, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for him to need her again. The house she bought was near Tracy's, close enough to reach quickly, far enough to maintain appearances. It was a strange domesticity they built. Hepburn, who had valued independence, who had walked away from marriage because she couldn't stand being defined by someone else, now organized her existence around a man who could never publicly claim her. She learned to cook for him, remarkable for someone who'd never bothered before. She created a home that felt more comfortable than his official one. Friends who visited spoke of finding Hepburn in the kitchen, Tracy reading the paper, a scene of domestic contentment that couldn't officially exist. During his worst periods, when drinking took over, she'd cancel commitments to care for him. She'd turn down roles, disappear from public view. The studios knew, her agents knew, but nobody questioned it because Spencer Tracy's problems were meant to be hidden, and Katharine Hepburn had volunteered to be part of that cover-up. She enabled him, clearly. Her love was absolute in a way that made it destructive. Friends tried to talk to her about it. Why are you doing this? Why are you giving up your life for a man who won't leave his wife? This was Katharine Hepburn, the woman who wore pants when Hollywood said never, who told studio executives where to go, who rebuilt her career from nothing on her own terms. And she made herself small for Spencer Tracy. Friends who knew them said Tracy was the love of her life, but they also said the relationship diminished her in ways that were painful to watch. Here was one of the most fierce, independent women in Hollywood history, and she was living like a mistress, cooking dinners in the shadows, keeping quiet about the most important relationship of her life. The public knew, of course, Hollywood knew, gossip columnists knew, but there was an unspoken agreement in those days to protect certain stars, and Tracy was protected. The official story was that he and Hepburn were close friends and frequent co-stars. The photographs showed them on set, professional and cordial. What they didn't show were the years Hepburn spent in waiting. Tracy's drinking got worse as the years went on. He would disappear for days on benders that left him hospitalized. Louise would be notified. She would handle it efficiently, having done this many times before. And then, when Tracy was sober again, Hepburn would be there, picking up the pieces, nursing him back to health, starting the cycle over. The pattern was destructive and everyone could see it. But Hepburn seemed incapable of walking away, or perhaps she chose not to. There's a difference between can't and won't, and with Hepburn, it was always won't. She was too strong to be trapped by anything she didn't choose, which means she chose this. Every day for 26 years, Hepburn's answer was always the same: she loved him. As if that explained everything. As if love justified the disappearing act she performed on herself. But here's the complicated truth. Tracy loved her too, completely. By all accounts, the relationship with Louise had been dead for years, maintained only out of obligation and faith. Louise knew about Hepburn. She knew Tracy loved another woman. And in a move that was either remarkably gracious or remarkably calculating, she accepted it. She would not divorce him, but she would not demand he stop seeing Hepburn either. It was a triangle of three people who all knew the truth, all agreed to live with it, and all paid different prices for that agreement. For Louise, the price was a husband who loved someone else. For Tracy, it was guilt that fed his drinking and depression, and for Hepburn, it was invisibility. She was famous, celebrated, one of the most acclaimed actresses in the world, and she had to pretend the most important relationship in her life was casual friendship. They made their films together, and those films are extraordinary documents of their relationship. Adam's Rib, Pat and Mike, Desk Set, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Watching them now, you can see the intimacy, the way they move around each other like dancers who've rehearsed for years. The banter feels real because it was. The tenderness feels earned because it was earned. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was their final film together, made in 1967 when Tracy was dying. He was 67 years old, ravaged by years of drinking and heart disease. He could barely work. The studio wanted to replace him, but Hepburn insisted. She knew it would be their last film, their last chance to work together, and she fought to make it happen. Watching that film, knowing what was happening behind the scenes, is almost unbearable. Tracy is visibly ill. Hepburn is visibly terrified. There's a scene near the end where her character delivers a monologue about loving her husband, about all the years they've had together, about how much he means to her. It's written for the character, but everyone on set knew Hepburn was talking to Tracy. The film wrapped on May 26, 1967. Tracy died 17 days later, on June 10, at the house he shared with Louise. Hepburn was not there when he died. Louise was. Because legally, publicly, officially, Louise was his wife and Hepburn was just a friend. So when Tracy had his final heart attack, it was Louise who was called. Louise who was at his bedside. Louise who made the arrangements. Hepburn found out Tracy had died from a reporter who called asking for comment. That's how she learned the man she'd loved for 26 years was gone. From a phone call, from a stranger. She did not attend the funeral. It would have been inappropriate, the studios said. Louise and the children should be allowed to grieve privately. Hepburn agreed. She stayed home. She mourned alone. Even in death, she was the woman who had to stay invisible. But here's what happened next, and this is where Hepburn's story takes on a different meaning. After Tracy died, she could have revealed everything. She could have told her side of the story, claimed her place in his life publicly, written a tell-all book. Hollywood would have eaten it up. The public was hungry for details. Hepburn never said a word. For decades, she maintained the fiction that she and Tracy had been friends, nothing more. She protected his memory, protected Louise, protected the children. It wasn't until nearly 30 years later, in her 80s, that she finally wrote about their relationship in her autobiography, and even then, she was circumspect, dignified, refusing to sensationalize what had been sacred to her. Some people saw this as loyalty, others saw it as self-erasure. The truth is probably both. Hepburn loved Tracy in a way that made her willing to disappear, but she also understood something about dignity, about not reducing love to scandal, about protecting what mattered, even at great personal cost. The question that haunts this story is, was it worth it? Did Hepburn sacrifice too much? Should she have demanded more? By modern standards, the answer seems obvious. No relationship should require one person to live in shadows. No love should demand that much self-negation. We would tell a friend in Hepburn's situation to leave, to find someone who could love her openly. But Hepburn lived by different rules in a different time. She was 34 when she met Tracy, already considered difficult, already past the age when actresses were expected to marry. She'd been married once before, briefly, and hated it. She wasn't looking for conventional domestic life. What she found with Tracy was partnership, creative collaboration, intellectual equality, emotional intimacy. The fact that it came with impossible conditions doesn't mean it wasn't real or valuable. It just means it was complicated. And maybe that's the real story. Not that Hepburn sacrificed herself for a man, though in some ways she did, but that she made an impossible choice in an impossible situation and lived with it for 26 years, because the alternative, not having Tracy at all, was worse. After Tracy's death, Hepburn kept working. She made some of her best films in her later years. She won 2 more Oscars. She lived alone in her Connecticut home, swimming in Long Island Sound every day, living exactly as she pleased. She never had another serious relationship. When asked about it, she would say she'd had the great love of her life. Why would she want another? There's a photograph of Hepburn taken late in her life, in her 70s. She's wearing her customary pants, her hair wild, laughing at something off camera. She looks utterly herself, completely free. And you have to wonder, did she regret the years with Tracy? In interviews toward the end of her life, when she finally spoke about Tracy, she was clear. She had no regrets. Yes, it was complicated. Yes, she'd lived in the margins. But she'd had 26 years with the love of her life, and that was more than most people ever got. The fact that society couldn't recognize their relationship didn't make it less real. That's very Hepburn, isn't it? To take an impossible situation and refuse to be diminished by it. To love completely on her own terms, even if those terms weren't what she would have chosen. To protect what was sacred and refuse to explain herself to anyone. Hollywood has had plenty of scandals, plenty of affairs, plenty of love triangles that ended in chaos and tabloid headlines. The Hepburn-Tracy relationship was different. It was conducted with discretion, maintained with dignity, protected by all 3 people involved. Nobody wrote tell-all books. Nobody went to the press. Louise Tracy lived until 1983, and she never publicly discussed Hepburn. The silence was maintained out of respect, or pain, or both. What we're left with is a love story that defies easy categorization. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a tragedy, exactly, though it had tragic elements. It was 2 people who loved each other under impossible circumstances and made it work in the only way available to them. And one woman who chose to love in the shadows rather than not love at all. The final scene of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is Spencer Tracy's last performance. He delivers a monologue about love, about commitment, about what really matters. He's talking to the young couple in the film, but if you watch Katharine Hepburn's face as he speaks, you can see she knows he's talking to her. This is goodbye. This is everything they never got to say in public, said through someone else's dialogue. When the film was released, Tracy was already gone. Audiences watched his final performance, not knowing it was final. But Hepburn knew. She'd known every day on that set that time was running out. And she'd shown up anyway, given everything she had, made sure their last collaboration was worthy of everything that came before. That's love. Not the kind in romance novels or Hollywood endings, the kind that shows up, keeps going, protects what's sacred, and asks for nothing in return. Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy didn't get their happy ending. But they got 26 years, they got 9 films that will live forever. They got a love that was real, even if it could never be acknowledged. And in the end, maybe that was enough.